Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. This one again is going to be part of the human nutrition and metabolism video, and it's going to be a very quick one. And today we're just going to talk about fiber, the classifications of fiber, its physiological effects, and what happens when fiber is fermented into short chain fatty acids, and what are the effects of that. So very quickly, let's just go through this. Fiber can be classified two different ways. We can have dietary fiber and functional fiber, but that has two different meanings. Dietary fiber is basically defined as being a non-digestible carbohydrate, okay, and in addition to lignin, okay. Now, lignin is not a carbohydrate, okay. It is not a carbohydrate. It is actually just a hydrophobic, highly branched aromatic polymer, okay, highly branched hydrophobic aromatic polymer, okay, and it basically helps to fill in the spaces in the cell wall of plants between cellulose and hemicellulose and pectin, okay. So what I mean by this, just very quickly, let's take a look at a plant cell wall here, okay. So you know how a plant has a plasma membrane, right? It's got a plasma membrane and it has a cell wall, okay. So this whole portion is going to be the cell wall, and we're going to look at some of the components of that, okay. So for example, this little greenish tube is going to be made up of a whole bunch of cellulose. This yellow bit is going to be hemicellulose, okay, and this little brownish bit is lignin, okay, and there is pectin inside of here as well. It's just not shown. Either way, you can see how lignin is like this highly branched thing that is filling in spaces in between the cellulose, the hemicellulose, and all these different things, okay? So this is just to kind of introduce you to what these things look like. Now, dietary fiber is non-digestible carbohydrates plus lignin, and you guys now know what that is. Functional fiber is things that were isolated, manufactured, but they are non-digestible, okay, carbohydrates, and they are known to have benefits to humans, okay. Now again, lignin is part of them, so you know that they're not all going to be non-digestible carbohydrates. Some of them are just like these little polymers. But the entire point is that these ones are known to have physiological benefits to humans, okay? That's why sometimes you can find supplements of these, okay? So dietary fibers will include things like cellulose, gums, hemicellulose, lignin, pectin, and resistant starches. So again, majority of these are all part of the plant cell wall. Resistant starches, so if you guys remember, we said starches would be things like amylose, amylopectin. Resistant starches have the same bond as regular starch, but the way they're actually packaged within the starch granules in the plants makes them not accessible to digestive enzymes, okay? But they're very similar in structure. And of course, there's different types of resistant starches. Like there's resistant starch 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going to talk about that, okay? Functional fiber. Functional fiber, again, includes things like cellulose, gums, pectins, lignin, and again, some resistant starches. So you can see that how all of these ones here in the dietary fiber, excluding hemicellulose, they all have some sort of functional role, okay, within the actual body, okay? They're known to have benefits, okay? Now, again, with cellulose, we had a brief discussion about cellulose and carbohydrate digestion, but cellulose is a long, linear, three polymer of glucose, okay? And they're actually attached with beta 1,4 linkages, okay? Beta 1,4 linkages. Again, if you need a refresher on what beta 1,4 linkages look like, go back and review in that video. We discussed it. Okay, so that's one way of classifying fibers. Another way of classifying fibers is classifying them into soluble and insoluble. Okay, but what do I mean by that? I mean soluble in water, okay? Soluble or insoluble in water, okay? Because that's going to determine their specific function, okay? So for example, pectins, gums, and these mucilages, they're going to be soluble in water. The insoluble ones are going to be things like cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Again, something important about hemicellulose is that sometimes hemicellulose can be classified as soluble, but hemicellulose is such a heterogeneous molecule that sometimes the things that it is made up of may make it insoluble, and other times it may make it soluble. Okay, so just remember that about hemicellulose. Okay, alrighty. So again, that's another classification with the soluble and the insolubility. So now, with all that said, let's look at the physiological effects of fiber. Okay, so if you are soluble, okay, if you're a soluble fiber, you're going to be able to form a viscous gel-like structure, okay, because you're soluble in water. And so this is important. When they form this viscous gel-like structure, that's going to actually occupy a vast amount of space, and that's going to delay gastric or stomach emptying. Okay, it's going to delay the stomach emptying, and it's going to alter the small intestine transit time. Okay, so specifically, it's going to actually increase transit time, meaning that food is going to stay within the stomach more. Okay, now if that's the case, right, if your nutrients and foods are staying in the stomach for a long time and in the small intestine for a longer time, that means that there's actually going to be a lower rate of nutrient diffusion. Okay, meaning that the nutrients that you are currently digesting and absorbing, they are actually going to take a longer time to diffuse into the enterocyte and get absorbed. For example, take glucose. Okay, glucose, right? It'll get absorbed, right, and then it'll have some sort of glycemic response as soon as it makes the blood glucose levels go up. But if we take this scenario, right, we're actually lowering the glycemic response that is produced by eating these soluble fibers, okay? A quick note, by the way, is that when you're eating fiber, okay, which is, by the way, found in fruits, legumes, oats, vegetables, cereals, grains, nuts, seeds, all that stuff, okay? You're not eating just one type of fiber, okay? You're not just eating a soluble fiber or an insoluble fiber. They're mixed, okay? They're mixed. So it's very heterogeneous effect that you're getting here. Nonetheless, we're going to look at it in isolation, just to understand what they do. Now, that's one thing that this viscous gel-like effect is going to have. The other thing that it's going to have is that it's going to actually lower the mixing of the chyme, okay, so that, digesta of food with the digestive enzymes, okay? So it's going to decrease that interaction between them, okay? Again, that's just because it's getting in the way. Other times, though, for example, soluble fibers can actually decrease digestive enzyme function. For example, gums have been known to inhibit small intestine peptidases, okay? So that's one example of just direct inhibition here. Other times, you can actually decrease the absorption of fat, and example being that during fat absorption and digestion, we'll talk about this in our next video, but you actually form these little things called micelles, okay? And micelles are these little positively charged aggregates. They're very small fat droplets, you can think about it, okay? And these guys help with the absorption of the fat into the enterocyte. If we inhibit the micelle formation, we're actually decreasing fat absorption, okay? And that's one of the things that soluble fibers can do. Another thing is they're going to increase bile acid excretion, okay? And if they increase bile acid excretion, that's going to actually lower cholesterol levels, okay? Or cholesterolemia. Every time you see emia, it refers to something in the blood. How do they do this? Well, they're going to bind to the bile, okay, and they're going to prevent bile from getting reabsorbed, right? Because if you remember, 97% of bile would get reabsorbed at the level of the jejunum and the ileum, okay? And How does this decrease cholesterolemia, by the way? Well, bile acids, if you guys remember, I said bile acids, they are coming from cholesterol, right? So they're derived from cholesterol. If I excrete a lot of these bile acids out, I have to create new bile acids. Well, how do I do that? I have to take cholesterol. I can either make the cholesterol from, scratch, right, de novo cholesterol, or I can uptake it from the blood, right, from LDL particles. Okay, and if I do that, I'm going to actually decrease cholesterolemia. Okay, that's one of the ways that this can happen. This other main thing that I really want you to remember is that soluble fibers are fermentable. Okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to be fermentable? Well, fermentation is basically just a large process, fairly complicated actually, that bacteria use to process these non-digestible carbohydrates, okay, into short-chain fatty acids, okay? And, they do this in many ways, and it's very complex. I'm not going to go into it, but they're going to make these short-chain fatty acids, which include acetate, propionate, and butyrate. And anytime you see this 8 here, okay, just know that it can also be written as like propionic acid. Okay, so propionate can also be written as propionic acid. Butyrate can be butyric acid. Okay, and it's the same thing every time you see that ATE. So for example, lactate, it's actually lactic acid. Okay, so again, just remember that. Sometimes people get confused when they see a different name. But through fermentation of these soluble fibers, you make short-chain fatty acids, which involve butyrate, propionate, and acetate. Okay. Now, these guys all have their own little function. Okay. And they can be used in many different ways. For example, acetate can actually be made into acetyl-CoA. All you need is a coenzyme A and some ATP, and boom, you've made an acetyl-CoA molecule. And you know that acetyl-CoA can actually be used in the Krebs cycle to make energy, okay? And actually, your cardiac cells and your skeletal muscle cells do use acetate to an extent. Propionate, your liver can actually make good use of propionate, okay? It can actually create some glucose from propionate. Propionate eventually, through some complex metabolism, can be turned into something known as succinyl-CoA. Okay, succinyl-CoA is a intermediate in the Krebs cycle. Okay, and from the Krebs cycle in the liver, you can actually make oxaloacetate, and then that oxaloacetate will then be able to go into glucose eventually. But again, this only happens in the liver because the liver has the necessary enzymes to make glucose. Okay, so in any other scenario, when you would make succinyl-CoA from propionate, you could just use it as energy, but not make glucose. And of course, butyrate can also be used. And actually, butyrate actually provides 2/3 of the energy for colonic cells. Okay, for colonic cells. So it's you can see how these short-chain fatty acids are pretty useful. Okay, and next slide we'll talk about the physiological effects of these short-chain fatty acids. So that's going to finish everything about soluble fibers. With insoluble fibers, again, they're not fermentable. Okay, meaning they're not very water soluble, okay? And that's actually good, okay? Because they're not water soluble, they're not fermentable. And the less fermentable a fiber is, the more it can actually add up to your fecal bulk, okay? So these guys have the ability to increase fecal bulk, which will actually stretch out the colon. And because it stretches out the colon, that's going to stimulate peristalsis to occur at the level of the colon. And this can actually facilitate with pooping. So yeah, that's why sometimes, insoluble fibers are actually used to relieve constipation, okay? Another function that these guys have is detoxification, okay, detoxification. So, for example, they have sometimes been termed as scavenger bacteria, okay? And what this means is that they essentially attach to bacteria, okay? And the bacteria will then get excreted out along with the non-fermentable fibers. Okay, so they're just kind of scavenging out for certain bacteria, and they're exhibiting a detoxification effect. Another thing that they have is that they are able to inhibit pro-carcinogenic enzymes, okay? And they also have the ability to absorb hydrophobic carcinogens, preventing them from, damaging the intestinal mucosa, okay? Or the colonic mucosa. Yeah. So again, that's the physiological effects of soluble and insoluble fibers. Now, let's take a look at the physiological effects of short-chain fatty acids, which are actually very numerous, and this doesn't even cover all of it. So, for example, short-chain fatty acids can actually increase water and sodium absorption into the mucosa of the colon, okay? They're actually going to lower the pH of the large intestine, and this actually has some implications. So they're going to lower the pH, which is going to increase calcium absorption. If you guys remember, we said that the large intestine is a place where water and electrolyte absorption occurs, so it makes sense that we're talking about water and sodium absorption. It makes sense that we're talking about calcium absorption. These are all mineral, electrolytes, and water. Furthermore, this low pH is going to allow for calcium to also bind to bile acids, and that's going to actually cause bile acid excretion. Okay, bile acid excretion. Again, this is good because it helps with that cholesterolemia thing. Another thing is that in and of itself, the low pH is just going to decrease bile acid solubility, which will again lead to excretion. And of course, the low pH favors good bacteria to grow. So some of the good bacteria in your gut include the lactobacilli, and of course the bifidobacteria. Okay, bifidobacteria. Cool. And by the by, soluble fibers, because they're able to, be fermented and form these short chain fatty acids, they can actually qualify as being prebiotics. Okay, so they promote the growth of good bacteria, again, like these lactobacilli and the bifidobacteria. Okay. Other things that short chain fatty acids do is they promote the differentiation and proliferation of the mucosal cells of the colon, which might have some roles in lowering cancer risk. Short chain fatty acids, they actually give energy for the colonic cells as well. Again, we talked about this with the role of butyrate. Okay. They also inhibit hepatic cholesterol synthesis. Again, a good example of this one is, for example, propionate. Propionate can actually help inhibit cholesterol synthesis, again, through some complex metabolic processes, which I'm not going to get into. And short chain fatty acids can help enhance immune function and increase colonic blood flow. Okay, and that's basically going to be the majority of the effects of short chain fatty acids and fibers, including insoluble and soluble. Okay, so that's going to be it for today, and I'll see you guys in the lipid metabolism video. If you like this video, please subscribe, comment, like, and I'll see you next time.